hunters or Russia are Africa's saviors. And we find that conversation on TikTok, you find it on X, formerly Twitter, on Facebook, where we have a new crop of Pan-Africanists leveraging these narratives to promote what Captain Touare, for instance, is doing in Burkina Faso, to say that he's basically changed Burkina Faso, is making it a new haven for development. And so other countries need to adopt military rule to have that level of development. Russia is a savior, and then the West is not here to help us, but to basically steal our resources.
Are we seeing a West-East divide here?
Reportage cannot be trusted. The media itself cannot be trusted because they are becoming an arm for spreading disinformation.
This series will unpack insights from Disinformation Index, a pioneering report by PEN Plusbytes that tracks how disinformation spreads and shapes democracy across Ghana, Côte d'Ivoire, Mali, and Burkina Faso. Over the next 9 episodes, we'll dive into how disinformation threatens governance, electoral integrity, and citizens' trust, and what can be done to strengthen resilience. And who better to kick off the first edition than Jerry Sam, Executive Director of PEN Plusbytes, to discuss the theme, the disinformation crisis in West Africa. Jerry Sam, welcome to InfoCheck.
Thank you very much, Francis. Thank you for having me.
Now, let's start with the big picture. Disinformation Index report identifies disinformation as one of the most serious threats to democracy stability in West Africa. I'd like to take PEN Plusbytes to develop this index. How does it aim to help policymakers, media, and citizens responding to this growing challenge?
Okay, thank you very much for the question. So PEN Plusbytes, we have been working around information integrity for the past 14 years. And through our work, we realized that disinformation is actually impacting democracy, undermining democracy itself. Is being used as a weapon, to undermine citizens' trust in public institutions, in government policy. And so basically, it's affecting most of the work that organizations such as ours doing in governance, our work around media and information literacy, and all of that. And then we realize also that disinformation is not static. It keeps on changing. The strategies that the actors use keep on changing. Sometimes we even realize that it is economic because people engage in disinformation or spread disinformation and get paid for it. So we wanted to understand, the trends, the patterns, how come it's taking a lot more hold in the Sahelian countries where democracy is struggling, and then how can we learn and then also impact coastal countries from Senegal all the way to Nigeria. What can we learn from the impact or the adverse impact so that we build resilience on it? So that's how come we decided to do this disinformation index, to understand the trends, the strategies, and what the actors are doing, and develop concrete strategies to counter it. So the 4 countries we did is basically a sample of West African countries. We looked at Mali, Burkina Faso, who are under different regimes, military regimes or authoritarian regimes, and then Ghana and Ivory Coast, who are under democratic regimes, so that we see how disinformation shapes governance differently, what narratives are being used, both in the Sahelian and also in the coastal countries. Basically, the index, just to give you highlights, shows that disinformation is just not fake news. We don't even like to use the term fake news because fake news has become, a reference point that governments or some leaders use, basically to discount information that does not go in their favor. So it could be true information, but because they don't like it, they call it fake news. So we rather, want to use the right terms, disinformation, misinformation. And disinformation, the intention is to cause harm. Intention is to destabilize, democracy and basically its principles. So we find that, disinformation is, is a systematic threat that undermines democratic governance, especially around elections. It's weakening trust in institutions and even, being used by authoritarian regimes, as we found in Mali and then Burkina Faso, to legitimize why they are still staying in power. Some of the narratives that we came across was that democracy is not working, so the military regimes are the right ones to use. And our findings also reveal that democracies such as the one we have in Ghana and Ivory Coast, is facing a lot of election-related disinformation, especially when it comes to the processes around elections, results counting, and all of this undermine democracy. So the index is basically to help us develop strategies and tactics that we can deploy to counter disinformation and its adverse impacts on our communities. Thank you.
Now, you spoke of trends, you spoke of patterns, and also you spoke about the difference between the two sets of countries. We have the coastal countries, Côte d'Ivoire, we have Ghana, we have the Sahelian countries, we have Mali, Burkina Faso. Can you take us through the methodologies used? Was it the same all through the four countries, considering their differences geographically, politically, and otherwise?
So thank you very much. So as you mentioned in the beginning of your intro, this is basically a comparative study of the authoritarian regimes and democratic regimes, Sahelian and coastal. And our primary objective was to assess, the impact of disinformation on public trust in the media ecosystem, both authoritarian and democratic regimes, electoral integrity, especially in democratic regimes where we do have periodic elections, and then also core democratic institutions, which do still exist across the countries. And then we use a composite on the methodology. We use a composite disinformation index. Um, the methodology was basically to see how reliable and comparative the comparable results across those countries will give us. So the first level is that we leveraged on a platform that PEN Plusbytes built ourselves, which we call the Disinformation Detection Platform. It is an AI-enabled digital tool that is designed to monitor and analyze disinformation using keywords in real time. So this is basically to ensure that accurate reporting is done. It also help us to collect data in real time, conversations around social media platforms. So these narratives then informed our conceptual framework and guided the design of the survey that we developed, that survey questionnaire. So, for example, some of the dominant narratives that we picked up were military juntas or Russia, Africa's saviors, and we find that conversation on TikTok. You find it on X, formerly Twitter, on Facebook, where we have a new crop of Pan-Africanists leveraging these narratives to promote, what Captain Touare, for instance, is doing in Burkina Faso to say that he's basically changed Burkina Faso, is making it a new haven for development. And so other countries need to adopt military rule to have that level of development. Russia is a savior, and then the West is not here to help us, but to basically steal our resources. Elections are routinely rigged in the democratic areas. So we fashioned our questions around this, sort of narratives. And then, we developed three key pillars. As I mentioned, the media ecosystem, the electoral integrity, and core democratic institutions to understand how disinformation is used to undermine even media reportage, to say that media reportage cannot be trusted. The media itself cannot be trusted because they are becoming an arm for spreading disinformation. And the scores were aggregated into a risk index, classifying the countries into low, medium, and high vulnerabilities. So this is the level of methodology, and we actually went on the ground to interview ordinary citizens, interview media practitioners, interview policymakers, and that's how come we came up with our key findings.
Yeah, you mentioned the three key pillars. I think it's interesting to know how were those pillars chosen? Why three and why those three in particular?
Okay, so these are the underlying themes, that most disinformation revolve. So the media ecosystem basically is a platform that is being used to either debunk or spread mis or disinformation. Also, through our work, social around African elections, we realize that disinformation and misinformation peaks around elections. So, disinformation is used to target political actors, is used to target political parties' manifestos, and even used to target election management bodies to see whether the electoral commissions are in bed with political parties and they are scheming to make sure one party wins over the other. And then also core democratic institutions. So core democratic institutions are your judiciary, your parliament, and the executive itself. With the executive itself, disinformation is used to target government policies, to say that, for instance, government policies cannot be trusted. They are not meant for us. Issues to do with corruption around the executive. There are a lot of disinformation around corruption. Some true, some not true, but basically used to delegitimize governance as well. So this is the reasons why we chose these three key thematic pillars, to analyze what disinformation is happening around them.
According to your index, it seems like there's a divide between military-led countries and civilian-led countries. Now, can you help us understand how this shapes the disinformation landscape? How the type of leadership in a country, for example, we have Mali and Burkina, which are under military rule. We have Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire, which are under civilian governments. How exactly does this shape the disinformation landscape in those countries, and possibly give us a dominant disinformation narratives in each country?
Thank you. So that's a very good question. So what we found was that the disinformation actors are different, across authoritarian ruled countries, which is Burkina and Mali. They had a lot of similarities. What we found was that most of the disinformation and some of its propaganda are actually state-led or state-sponsored or regime led. So the regime has actors, has some media, state media, for instance, is being used to push a lot of propaganda or disinformation, basically to legitimize why they are not transitioning into democracy. I mean, Mali has postponed elections severally. I mean, we even geared towards having an election in Mali this February. That has been postponed. And some of the narratives basically being used is that the junta is here to help. And when the junta came in, they have been able to curb the incursions of rebels, which the democracy led administrations were not able to do. So they are better placed to protect citizens. They are better placed to make sure that corruption is reduced to a minimum. So, you have this information that is coming from the government itself to support why they are still in power and they're not going to democracy, because democracy is not helping. Those are the narratives that are being pushed. But then with the democracy or democracy regimes like in Ghana and Ivory Coast, the actors are different. They are mainly coming from opposition elements. They're also coming from influencers, on social media, who, most of it are actually, economic. So they will push disinformation content around corruption, around elections, around government policies, basically to get engagements around their get engagement and get followers. Because the more they do that, the more their platforms are active or their handles are active to get more adverts, to get more traction around the things that they post, and get revenue from engagement from the platforms. And then also we have foreign manipulated, interventions or incursions. These are, basically coming from Russia, which also is pushing the fact that democracy is not working. So then, the citizens have to, stand up and demand their rights. It's also, they also, the foreign actors also leverage on themes around LGBTQI to say that the West is pushing agendas which are not, culturally accepted by, African countries, and therefore we shouldn't accept democracy. We should accept, the West because they are going to dilute our culture, our religion, and all of that. So it plays different. Whereas, in the authoritarian regime, disinformation is majority led by the government itself, the authoritarian government itself. In the democratic regimes, the governments have very minimal role in pushing disinformation, but then it's coming from ordinary citizens and then it's coming from foreign actors. So those are, some of the key differences that we came out with.
It's interesting to hear you say that. Are we seeing a West-East divide here where we have Russia, like you mentioned, on one side, then we have the West on one side? And when we throw in things like AI into the mix, how complicated does this make the landscape in terms of disinformation in West Africa?
So it's become more of an information war, and also a war of winning hearts and minds. So in the Sahel region, you find that Russia, broadcasting institutions or entities pushing more disinformation around, winning the hearts and minds of the ordinary citizens that, they are our saviors. They are our partners because, when they are, in our resources, mining and stuff like that, they share with us. China, for instance, will say that, they are developing our infrastructure, whereas the West is not doing that. They're basically siphoning it, back to the West. So there are a lot of anti-French disinformation, for instance, in the Sahelian regions, anti-West disinformation in those regions. Whereas in the coastal regions, it's more targeted towards democracy. That democracy is not working, as which I've emphasized earlier on. The AI question that you thrown in the mix is making it very, very difficult for our work, for instance, because I mean the AI platforms are becoming easily accessible. There are tools that can be easily automated, whereas in the past people will have to do Photoshop. You have to have a skill to do it. Now you just throw in words, throw in links, and the AI will generate disinformation content for you and I easily, for ordinary citizens to push it. You can automate the platforms to consistently use bots to spread this information. So it's very, very difficult to counter, which goes back to my earlier submission about understanding the strategies and the trends that is happening. I mean, the recently held Ghana elections, majority of the disinformation that we were countering was coming from bots and AI generated, which makes it very difficult for even somebody who is media and information literate to see the difference between disinformation, AI generated disinformation, and actual content. So that has made our work difficult, and I'm sure we'll come to recommendations soon. But then it makes it very, very difficult to counter disinformation. Fact checking is becoming also very, very difficult. So what this index is informing us is that fact checking also has to find a way of using AI to detect and counter this information as well. So it is a very I would say it's a dire situation. It is we can even describe it akin to a war, a war of information where we are trying to counter this information with credible information.
Now, you talked about elections, and Cote d'Ivoire is heading to elections very soon. Just to use that and juxtapose this, in terms of public confidence, because when disinformation goes on for a while, it has an effect on public confidence, especially on institutions. In this case, electoral processes or institutions that are involved in the electoral process. How do you think this has affected public confidence in these institutions, even in countries like Ghana and Côte d'Ivoire?
Yeah, so the confidence and trust, our trust to it as well in these institutions. So, I mean, it's so easy now that people can use AI to even mimic websites of these election management bodies. So you have a website that looks exactly like the Electoral Commission's website, also churning out information. I mean, we've had even picture posts or picture quotes of electoral commissioners stating, something around elections, which, we find out that it's not true. In Ghana, we had an incident of where there were there were picture cards and quotes which even stated that the elections will happen from a different day from when it is actually announced. And it has the EC logo, it has EC officials on it, which is very, very difficult for ordinary, citizens to tell the difference. So in that instance, then it even affects the electoral process itself, because even when election, the EC announces times for registration, times to check your name in the register, it's being counter. It has a counter advert or counter information about what the EC has said. With a false one or a fake one, then citizens are torn between which one to believe, which one to trust. And if it goes on for a while, even EC's, the Electoral Commission's communication is doubted, and people don't know what to believe and what not to believe. And in terms of even electoral information, if the information coming out also has a disinformation counter information, then people will tend to not trust, information that comes from the Electoral Commission. Same with political parties. So political party manifestos, we had that, even with the Ivory Coast one coming up, we had the same thing with the Ghana elections, where political party manifestos are, manipulated. There are different versions produced, and then it affects citizens even access to information that they need to form opinions for who to vote for. You see what I mean? So even your opinion on who to vote for, is affected by this information. And citizens go to the polls and are making wrong choices, which are going to affect them for the whole entire time that the person that they voted for is not the one that they voted for. So it has a very dire consequence for elections and ultimately for our democracy itself, because first of all, you're going to make wrong choices. Second, you tend not to even believe government communication and policies. I mean, we had that during the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, where people started taking all sorts of concoctions and then not trust information coming from health departments and ministries because of this information. Same thing is happening to our democracy, where we are not trusting government policies. We are not leveraging on the policies, especially social protection policies, which is being funded by our tax money. And at the end of the day, if you don't trust those policies, it also goes down to the fact that if those policies are not helping me, then why do I pay taxes? Why don't I evade taxes? Which goes to our development. So you see the trend with disinformation, right from the elections, right from government policies, it affects our development itself. It affects our well-being in terms of health, in terms of education, in terms of sanitation, those basic things. All of those things are affected by disinformation. And the actors sometimes knowingly or unknowingly are playing to this. So it's something that I will even call it as an earthquake or tsunami that is affecting our core foundations as societies. I mean, disinformation currently in Ghana, we have a violent crisis in Boko, in the northern parts of Ghana, where disinformation is being used around tribal differences, around chieftaincy issues, and therefore this information is being used to amplify and deepen the divisions within our communities, and it's affecting our development. And so I mean, I'm happy that we are having this conversation. Hopefully, we will have policymakers, taking drastic actions. Make sure that the policies and laws that we have, is implemented to the letter, so that we keep this information and it's not just a civil society fight. It's not just a media fight, but it's a whole society fight.
You talked of policymakers, which are very important. That takes me to the next point, which is recommendations. In a society or in a situation where we have a state-sponsored disinformation campaign sponsored by foreign actors, what are the recommendations from your study? Could you give us a summary of the urgent steps needed from government, civil society, media, tech, all the concerned parties, and even citizens to counter this?
So so our conversation flows. I'll start from government. I mean, with the democracy-led governments, or governments that are practicing democracies, it is a bit, not easy, but we have structures and frameworks already there. Most of these countries do have, even in authoritarian countries, before they became authoritarian or dictators, they already had existing laws. And we believe that we need to start going back to the basics. We need to leverage the existing laws and let it bite. The sanctions within these laws are not being used. And we need to make sure that the sanctions within those laws are being applied to ordinary citizens, to media houses, and all those, even the big tech platforms who are, allowing their platforms to be used to spread disinformation. And then on another level, which can be, applied by both, authoritarian and democratic-led governments, is to use media and information literacy. So media information literacy, which PEN Plusbytes we are leading, and with our partners from UNESCO and DW Academy, and also, of course, our current relationship with West Africa Democracy Radio, is that once we begin to let people become literate in media and information literacy, they will understand how the media platforms work, how news gathering is done, the ethics of it, how to be critical thinkers. Media information literacy has advantage. It's like a vaccine. It inoculates people against disinformation because you understand, how the media works, how disinformation is done, so that when you see it coming, you can see, clearly from a WhatsApp message that this headline, for instance, is just a clickbait. This is not how credible information, is done, so that you don't, become yourself a purveyor of disinformation. And we believe that governments should lead in making media information literacy a go-to, strategy by infusing it in school curriculum so that we catch, the youth young. So if we have, media information literacy integrated in school curricula, so right from primary or junior level of education, people understand how media works, how news is done, the ethics of it. Then, when they are growing up, their news consumption becomes different. They become, critical users of news. They become critical about, news that they consume online. So government has a key role to play. Governments can adopt, the disinformation platforms that we developed, which is able to, see disinformation in real time, strategies changing in real time, and develop strategies, policies to counter, disinformation, or even update existing laws based on the changing trends. On the media side, I mean, we are all in the media platforms. We know and understand that media houses have challenges with funding and all of that. But what we crave and what we propose or recommend is that at least let's have a desk for fact checking information that comes from the field before we push it up. And this can be supported by updated editorial standards. So that we reduce the spread of manipulated content from our platform or what news comes on our platform. With civil society, we are doing quite a lot of work, and I think we need to start, implementing or integrating MIL into our programming. But the key thing that we keep on missing is that most of the things that we do from civil society angle with our work around fact checking is that we're still doing it in French and then in English, ignoring local languages. So we are, basically, leaving out our constituents in the rural area, our constituents who cannot read in English and French. We need to start, doing programming, doing our projects in local languages, targeting rural populations, women, youth, on how to, do verification, how to, be critical thinkers. So that for the civil society. From the donor end, we will pray that donors will support, cross-border investigative journalism, provide grants around, media and information literacy, and then also support, things that ECOWAS is doing so that, ECOWAS can, influence individual governments around disinformation and see how disinformation is really impacting on our development. On big tech platforms, unfortunately for us, the big tech platforms have almost abandoned West Africa. I'm saying this because, during the Ghana elections, we're not seeing them on the ground to basically call out disinformation or even take off disinformation content on their platforms. And we believe that, they should come back on board, recruit moderators who understand our local, cultural nuances and context, and then identify this information and take them off our platforms. Or, they don't give it oxygen, or the algorithms should ignore those disinformation so that it doesn't reach many people, and then provide transparency on how the algorithms work so that we know how to, identify them and debunk them. So that's the recommendations that we have on this various actors in the space.
Jerry Sam, Executive Director of PEN Plusbytes, thank you for coming on InfoCheck.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope we have more conversations like this in future. Thank you.
Join us next time as we continue to unpack the data, trends, and tools for combating false narratives across the region. I'm Francis Boniface. Thank you for listening, and remember, stay informed, stay critical,